Free Will, a Mystrikal Perspective, Part 1 of 6. The Timeless Puzzle of Free Will. For ages, philosophers and scientists have wrestled with the free will conundrum, the perplexing question of whether our choices are truly our own or the inevitable outcome of prior causes. We feel ourselves choosing to speak or remain silent, to act or abstain. Yet we know that behind every choice lies a chain of events stretching back beyond memory. Is our sense of agency a grand illusion? Or is there a way to reconcile it with a world governed by natural laws? Many thinkers lean toward the first answer, determinism, the view that all our actions are the inevitable products of preceding events and conditions. In this deterministic picture, every decision is the effect of prior causes, pointing toward a law-governed future, deterministic or probabilistic if quantum effects matter, either way, leaving no room for contracausal freedom. Our cherished sense of freedom to choose may then be an illusion, a byproduct of neurons and chemistry unfolding in the brain. Indeed, experiments have found that the brain often initiates actions moments before we consciously decide to act, hinting that our sense of volition might be a post hoc story we tell ourselves. In this camp, a leading voice is neuroscientist Sam Harris, who argues unequivocally that free will is an illusion. In his book Free Will, 2012, Harris contends that we do not control the origin of our thoughts or intentions as we assume. Instead, they emerge from a cascade of prior causes that we neither initiate nor oversee. He often cites such neuroscience experiments to show that the brain can decide on a course of action before our conscious mind is even aware of it, implying that our feeling of making a choice is simply the mind catching up to what the brain has already done. In Harris's view, even our deepest deliberations are the product of background processes we do not consciously direct, making our cherished sense of autonomy more of a compelling narrative than an objective fact. Understandably, this conclusion is deeply unsettling. If we never truly choose, what becomes of personal accountability or moral responsibility? Not to mention, what the fuck is the point? Not everyone is ready to write free will off as a mere illusion. The problem of free will has always been about finding space for genuine choice between total determinism and random chance. If our decisions are not fully determined, the alternative shouldn't be pure randomness, as randomness offers no more control than strict fate. For centuries, those who defend free will have struggled to show that our actions depend on us and are not preordained by fate, divine decree, or physical causality. Modern philosophers often seek a middle path in compatibilism, the idea that even in a law-bound universe, a meaningful form of free will can exist. Compatibilists argue that we are free so long as our choices flow from our own internal desires and reasoning, without external coercion, even if those desires have causal roots. Still, others remain unsatisfied. Some insist that true freedom requires a breach in the chain of causation, a position known as libertarian free will. In contrast, others maintain that any real free will is impossible, and our sense of agency is entirely a construct. The debate spans philosophy, science, and religion, with high stakes and no final consensus in sight. Mystrikism, a modern worldview grounded in naturalism and wonder, offers a fresh resolution to this age-old impasse. It invites us neither to deny our scientific understanding nor to dismiss our lived experience, but to integrate them into a fuller perspective. Rather than choose sides in the stalemate, Mystrikism seeks a balance, blending clear-eyed rationality with humility and a sense of awe at the mysteries that remain. In this exploration, we'll journey through Mystrikism's approach, one that shows how free will can be both not absolutely real and yet profoundly meaningful for how we live our lives. Free Will, a Mystrikal Perspective, Part 2 of 6. Mystrikism's naturalistic worldview, honesty, humility, and awe. Before tackling free will directly, we must ground ourselves in the spirit of Mystrikism. This philosophy rests on the pillars of naturalism, honesty, justice, humility, and awe. It is uncompromisingly naturalistic. It posits that nothing exists outside matter energy and the lawful cosmos, yet it cherishes the richness of human experience. In Mystrikism, which uses evidence as our guide, there are no observed and verified supernatural loopholes or mystical forces steering our decisions, only the intricate dance of nature unfolding through us. Being honest means upholding empirical truth above comforting fiction, embracing the integrated principles of science as our best tool for understanding reality. Humility means recognizing the limits of our knowledge and being willing to be proven wrong, especially when peering into the great unknown. And through it all, Mystrikism urges a reverent awe, an appreciation that even a thoroughly natural universe can inspire profound wonder. We approach life's mysteries, free will included, not with dogmatic certainty, but with curiosity and respect. Crucially, Mystrikism rejects false dichotomies. It rejects both extremes of rigid objectivism and free-floating subjectivism, seeking instead a balance in which subjective human experience is honored while tested against reality. In other words, this worldview will not let us simply say, "Experience says I have free will, end of story," nor "Science says I don't, case closed." True to its principles, Mystrikism guides us toward integration. True wisdom lies in integration, where subjective experience is refined through objective inquiry and objective knowledge is enriched by human meaning. With that integrative mindset, let us turn to the puzzle at hand and see how Mystrikism's approach to emergentism and reductionism can resolve the free will paradox. Emergentism and reductionism, a key to the paradox. At the heart of Mystrikism's resolution of the free will dilemma is its understanding of emergentism and reductionism. These terms sound academic, but the idea is intuitive. Reductionism holds that any complex phenomenon can be explained by breaking it down into its fundamental parts and laws. In the reductionist view, we are ultimately collections of atoms obeying the laws of physics. In principle, with godlike knowledge of every particle and force, one could predict every action we take. There is much truth here. Mystrikism fully embraces the triumphs of reductionist science, which has revealed the basic building blocks of nature, quarks, electrons, fields, and their laws. Indeed, if you know the physics of all particles, you could derive everything else. That is the classic dream of a theory of everything. Determinism, in this sense, means the state of the universe at one moment fixes the next. At the microscopic level of molecules and neurons, there is no room for ghostly, free interventions. Emergentism, however, reminds us that new properties and realities appear at higher levels of complexity, even though nothing supernatural is added. Nobel physicist Philip Anderson once said, "More is different," and Mystrikism delights in this truth. Consider a simple example: temperature. A single atom doesn't have a temperature. Temperature only makes sense as an average behavior of countless atoms moving together. It is an emergent property of a crowd. Likewise, a single water molecule isn't wet in isolation. Wetness is a quality that emerges when billions of H2O molecules cohere into a liquid. The wetness is real to our fingers. Yet, if you zoom into the molecular level, you won't find a tiny drop of wet attached to any one particle. As the Mystrikal ethos explains, concepts like solidity or wetness are not present at the particle level, but become real at aggregate scales. New properties appear at higher levels of complexity without violating lower-level rules. There's no new mysterious force that makes water wet or gives a gas pressure. Those phenomena are the collective result of many interacting units. All emergent phenomena still obey the fundamental laws, but they also have their own identities and characters at their level. Mystrikism applies the same reasoning across all layers of reality, from physics to chemistry to biology, to psychology, and beyond. Each level introduces concepts and rules that are useful and valid in their own right, even though, at bedrock, nothing exists except the interactions of the lowest level ingredients. We do not commit a mistake by talking about cells or minds or societies as real things, even though each of those ultimately consists of atoms. We recognize that at each scale, specific patterns emerge that deserve their own descriptions. Mystrikism considers this a hierarchy. Each level, physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, sociology, has its own emergent regularities, which we treat with some autonomy. Still, that independence is one of convenience and complexity, not of separate existence. Higher-level phenomena are real and meaningful in context, even though they are entirely made of lower-level components. Free will, a Mystrikal perspective. Part 3 of 6. The water and wetness metaphor, scale-dependent reality. To truly grasp this, let's linger on the water and wetness metaphor, for it holds a powerful lesson about scale-dependent experience. Imagine a single molecule of water drifting in space. It has atoms vibrating, bonds stretching, but it makes no sense to ask whether that solitary molecule is wet. Now imagine a vast quantity of such molecules pooled together in a lake. As you dip your hand in, you feel the water's coolness wrap around your fingers, the refreshing tingle that runs up your arm. You might even be moved by the beauty and tranquility of the water, as ripples form and dance around your submerged fingertips. The property of wetness emerges only at the collective level. It is scope-dependent. Under a microscope, you see the dance of H2O molecules, but wetness disappears. Zoom out, and wetness reappears as an experiential reality. Both perspectives are valid. At one level, there are just molecules in motion. At another, there is genuinely wet water. Mystrikism uses this as an illustrative analogy for many phenomena. It's not just a metaphor, it's how scientists themselves understand the world. We know that solidity, the hardness of a rock, is mostly empty space at the atomic scale, yet the solidity is no less real to our everyday dealings. Consciousness itself can be viewed this way. The Mystrikal perspective posits that chemical properties like wetness of water and consciousness from biological networks and so on all arise in just this emergent fashion. No single neuron in your brain has the awareness of self or the capacity to choose, yet when billions of neurons interconnect in just the right way, this miracle of the mind appears. Think of it. A mind, with all its colors of perception, memory, desire, and choice, blooming out of electrical and chemical exchanges among cells. To a mystrik, this realization is profound, a feeling of reverence at how nature self-organizes into greater complexity. It doesn't require invoking anything supernatural. It requires us only to appreciate the layered richness of the natural world. So, when we ask whether free will exists, we should remember water and wetness. We should ask, at what level are we looking? If we inspect the microscopic level of physics and neurons, perhaps we will find no little kernel of free will floating about, just as we find no wetness particle in a single molecule. But if we observe the whole conscious being navigating life, we may find that free will is a valid description of what's happening, just as wetness describes what water does at our scale. In Mystrikism, scope matters. We learn to be comfortable saying something is not real in one sense and entirely real in another, without contradiction. Consciousness and choice as emergent phenomena. Let's apply this insight directly to consciousness, choice, and the feeling of agency. Neuroscience tells us that every decision we make corresponds to physical events in the brain. Neurons firing, signals cascading, neurotransmitters releasing. Suppose we were to observe this at the reductionist level. In that case, we'd see a biochemical chain reaction, a deterministic, or at times, probabilistic, process governed by the laws of cause and effect. From that outside perspective, one might be tempted to say, it's all just neurons and physics, therefore what we call decision is merely an illusion. Free will doesn't exist. This is one extreme that some hold, a view that our sense of making choices is entirely mistaken. But pause and consider. There is another perspective, the inside perspective. From within our minds, we experience a very different reality. We weigh reasons, imagine future outcomes, feel torn between options, and finally decide. That lived experience of deliberation is not a trivial thing to be brushed aside. It is an emergent reality in its own right. We feel deliberation, we can change based on reasoning, and so on. The language of desires, intentions, and plans operates at the level of minds, not at the level of molecules, yet it genuinely explains what we do. A neuroscientist could describe the synaptic currents underlying my choice of words as I speak. Still, I, at the human level, would say, I'm trying to express this idea clearly. Both descriptions are true, one in the language of physics, one in the language of agency. Mystrikism teaches that these perspectives do not cancel each other out, they complement each other. It encourages us to avoid what one might call category errors, such as expecting to find wetness in a single molecule or to pinpoint free will in a single neuron. Instead, we see conscious choice as an emergent property of the brain, just as mind itself emerges from matter. Free will is how decision-making feels from the inside, when a brain with a certain level of complexity makes choices. In other words, free will is the subjective experience of a very complex deterministic system engaging in self-directed action. It's the name we give to the phenomenon of a brain weighing information, reflecting on itself, and producing behavior in a flexible, adaptive way. From this vantage point, free will is not an illusion at all. It is an accurate description of what's happening at the level of persons, even though at the level of particles, it looks different. The 17th century philosopher Baruch Spinoza intuited something like this long ago. He observed that humans feel free simply because we are aware of our desires and choices, yet unaware of the deeper forces that influence us. Men believe themselves free, Spinoza wrote, because they are conscious of their actions and ignorant of the causes of them. We now know those causes include genes, conditioning, neural wiring, the whole chain of physics and biology. Yet Spinoza also noted a remarkable fact. Even if you come to know that your will is determined, you will still experience it as free. He likened it to the way we see the sun. We know the sun is 150 million kilometers away, but it looks about 20 feet overhead. Likewise, even if we adequately understand that our will is not free, we will still experience it as free. This is a crucial insight. The appearance of freedom is built into how our minds perceive their own activity. In Mystrikal terms, this is because freedom is the mind's self-experience of its complex volitional process. It's not a mistake to feel that way. It's simply how a choosing mind manifests internally. Thus, our consciousness gives us a first-person window on an emergent process that from the outside appears determined, but from the inside feels open. Free Will, a Mystrikal Perspective, Part 4 of 6. Reconciling Freedom with Causality, the Mystrikal Resolution. So, is free will real or not? The Mystrikal answer is a reconciliation. Yes and no. It depends on the level of analysis. At the most fundamental level of description, free will, in the absolute sense, does not exist. We are not magic beings outside of nature. Every choice we make, every whim or effort, arises from prior conditions and causes. In this strict reductionist sense, one could say our will is not free from causation at all. It's woven into the great causal tapestry. However, and here is the beautiful twist, free will, as we experience it, does exist and matters a great deal. Mystrikism leans toward what philosophers call compatibilism, the idea that free will is compatible with a deterministic universe, so long as we define it at the right level. This right level is the familiar compatibilist one, reasons-responsive, coercion-free agency that runs on biology and physics, not against them. Understanding this Mystrikal view has profound implications, particularly in guiding moral judgment. Recognizing the nature of free will can change how we perceive responsibility and accountability in ourselves and others. It provides a nuanced framework that informs decisions about justice, compassion, and personal growth. This approach encourages us to consider not only the actions of individuals, but also the underlying causes that shape those actions, inviting us to respond with empathy and thoughtful guidance rather than mere condemnation. What does this mean? It means shifting our understanding of free will from a mysterious ability to defy causality to a mind's capacity to imagine options, deliberate, and choose based on reasons. None of that requires breaking the laws of physics, yet it's a freedom in its own domain. Our decisions are products of brain chemistry responding to inputs, so at a physical level, they're determined. Still, free will as we experience it is an emergent aspect of our sapient brains making choices, and it remains meaningful at that phenomenological level. In simpler terms, we have free will in the way that matters to us. We make choices consciously, we reflect, and we can change our behavior in light of that reflection. Thus, we act with a kind of autonomy, even though deterministic processes implement that autonomy. Mystrikism reframes the old question. It's not, do we have free will, yes or no? A question that pits subjective intuition against objective analysis in a winner-takes-all battle. Instead, it asks, at what level is free will real, and how do these levels harmonize? The answer is that both levels can be affirmed. We acknowledge the causal story, that from the Big Bang to this very moment, a law-governed chain of events has led each of us to our current state. Deterministic at scale and at times probabilistic in the details. And we acknowledge the personal story, that as human beings, we authentically weigh choices, set goals, and act in accordance with our character and values. There is no contradiction because these are two descriptions of the same reality. As Mystrikism expounds, we don't have to deny the reality of one level to validate the other. Both can be true. I chose freely, and my brain state causally produced that choice. In a sense, free will is the experiential aspect of complex decision-making, an emergent-level description of the mind, in the epistemic sense, fully reducible in principle to underlying physical processes. This is the Mystrikal solution to the controversy. Free will exists at the emergent level, even though it does not exist as a fundamental force in physics. The philosopher Daniel Dennett echoes this view from a secular standpoint. He notes that the popular debate often swings between two extreme and mistaken images of free will, the magic libertarian thing that many ordinary folks believe in, versus the fatalistic determinism that these folks see as the only other choice. But Dennett says there is something in between these extremes, a robust conception of freedom that is the kind of free will worth wanting. It is the freedom to be an active agent rather than a puppet, even if the agent is made of robotic components at its core. Mystrikism wholeheartedly agrees. It explicitly rejects the nihilistic notion that, if we are nothing but atoms, our cherished experiences, love, beauty, or moral choice, are meaningless illusions. Instead, Mystrikism insists that understanding our nothing but atoms nature should heighten our appreciation for things like love, creativity, and yes, our sense of freedom, precisely because they are rare emergent phenomena of those atoms. In embracing both levels of explanation, we enrich our view of life. We can marvel at how the law-governed sheet music gives rise to the song of a deliberating mind. We can be inspired materialists, utterly scientific in our grounding, yet lyrically poetic in our awe for what science has uncovered, and for all it has yet to unveil. Free Will, a Mystrikal Perspective, Part 5 of 6. Responsibility, Compassion, and Growth in a Determined World. One might worry, if prior causes ultimately determine our choices, do concepts like moral responsibility or personal growth still make sense? Mystrikism's answer is a resounding yes. These concepts remain not only meaningful but vital. The emergent perspective assures us that we are not mere passive bystanders to fate. We are active participants whose decisions make a difference to the world and ourselves. We still praise, blame, reward, and correct behavior, not because anyone has a spooky contra-causal free will, but because those social responses help shape the causes that lead to future behavior. Understanding the causal web more deeply can foster compassion. If a person has done wrong, a mystrik sees both the individual choice and the surrounding causes such as upbringing or environment that led to it. This nuanced view encourages us to respond with empathy and a focus on improvement rather than with simplistic condemnation. We realize, there but for the circumstances go I, and this insight tempers judgment with kindness without absolving accountability. We still hold people accountable in practice because accountability shapes future behavior, while aiming our systems toward justice, rehabilitation, and societal well-being. In Mystrikism, determinism is not a moral dead end. It's a call to understand better and guide the causes that shape human lives. Even Sam Harris, perhaps the most outspoken critic of the traditional free will concept, emphasizes that recognizing free will as an illusion should increase our empathy rather than lead us to nihilism. He argues that once we fully appreciate that people's actions emerge from circumstances beyond their control, their genes, childhood experiences, brain wiring, etc., it becomes harder to hate them and easier to respond with understanding. For example, rather than simply condemning a criminal as evil, Harris suggests we consider the biological and social factors that led that person to commit wrongdoing. This doesn't mean we deny the need to protect society from harm, but it does reframe our attitude. We still hold people accountable, yet without the needless anger that comes from assuming everyone had absolute freedom to choose differently. Another common fear is fatalism, the despairing idea that if everything is determined, our efforts don't matter, and the future is fixed regardless of our actions. This is a profound misunderstanding. Determinism is not the same as fatalism. In a deterministic framework, outcomes are indeed fixed by prior causes, but one of those causes is you, your will, your effort. The future is shaped by what you do in the present. As Daniel Dennett clarifies, a fixed future doesn't mean an unchanging future. It simply means that changes unfold in accordance with the law. Your choice to study, to apologize, or to stand up for justice is part of the causal chain that alters the world's course. The fact that it was inevitable that you would choose as you did, in hindsight, does not mean it wasn't you choosing it in the moment, with uncertainty and resolve. Let's consider this practical example. Imagine a student struggling with poor academic performance. By recognizing the deterministic nature of behaviors, they can trace them back to their causes and decide to redesign their study environment by removing distractions and setting a consistent schedule. These small, deliberate changes in their environment, driven by an understanding of causality, dramatically boost their academic performance. This shows how embracing determinism equips us with the agency to influence and improve our lives. In advance, no one can perfectly foresee the outcome in practice. From your own perspective, the future is open as you deliberate. You genuinely don't know what you will decide until you've made a decision. That subjective openness is not a lie. It's a consequence of our finite knowledge and the complexity of the world. In the Mystrikal view, this ever-present uncertainty underwrites our sense of freedom and possibility. Life is like a book being written. The ending may be determined once written, but as the author writing it, even if the author is ultimately the physical universe working through you, you experience the story as full of branching possibilities. Thus, personal growth remains real. A person can be determined and yet change for the better because that change is accomplished through learning, reflection, and effort, all of which are deterministic processes as well. There is no static fate that ignores your input Instead, your input is exactly what fate consists of. A mystic might say, we must live as if we have free will and are responsible, because that emergent perspective is practically valid, even if we know causal chains underpin it. In practice, this means we continue to encourage virtue, discourage harm, set goals, forgive, repent, and improve ourselves. We do so with a humble awareness that our will is part of nature, not above it, not separate from it, which fuels compassion. As the Mystrikal outlook emphasizes, we should be humble in victory and understanding in failure, knowing each outcome has deep roots. We co-create our lives within the framework of causality, much like gardeners cultivating a garden that ultimately grows by natural laws. For example, Sam Harris argues that losing belief in free will need not make one fatalistic. It can increase one's sense of freedom. Becoming aware of the real causes behind our thoughts and actions can, paradoxically, give us more creative control over our lives. In this framing, seeing ourselves as fully within the causal chain pushes us to grab all the levers we can reach, shaping habits, environments, and incentives, rather than pretending we float above causality. Far from crushing the will, this perspective can empower it. Free Will, a Mystrikal Perspective, Part 6 of 6. Freedom reimagined with humility and wonder. In the Mystrikal perspective, the ancient riddle of free will is resolved not by a simplistic verdict of true or false, but by a synthesis that honors both our scientific understanding and our lived reality. We discover that the paradox dissolves when we recognize free will as a matter of perspective and scale. At the level of quarks and neurons, there is just the unfolding of physical law. At the level of conscious persons, there is choice, intention, and responsibility. These statements are not enemies. They are two facets of one extraordinary reality, a reality in which the universe has, as Carl Sagan so eloquently noted, awakened to contemplate itself through us. We don't have to choose one and deny the reality of the other. Determinism and freedom reconcile as the wind and the sail, each illuminating different aspects of existence. And what a wondrous existence it is. Consider this, the same cosmos that, in its youth, was a swirl of blind forces has, through eons of evolution, given rise to beings that ponder morality, invent art, and debate the nature of their own free will. Our capacity for free action, understood emergently, is part of the grandeur and splendor of the natural world and the unknown. It means the laws of physics have choreographed a scene in which those laws themselves are discussed on a stage where concepts like freedom, choice, and purpose hold sway. Far from diluting the significance of our will, this realization should fill us with gratitude and awe. Understanding our material nature can deepen our appreciation of phenomena such as love, creativity, and purpose. They are significant consequences of material reality, not mere epiphenomena. In embracing this view, we embrace a naturalistic humility. We are not gods above causal law, but we also deserve dignity. Humans and other sapient beings, if they exist, are nature becoming conscious, nature with a voice and a choice. Finally, Mystrikism encourages us to hold this knowledge with an open heart. We haven't necessarily resolved the free will conundrum, but with a diplomatic harmony of perspectives, we offer a truce. We remain, always, investigators of the best current approximation of truth and lovers of mystery. Even as we conclude that free will is real in one sense and not real in another, we do so with a smile, knowing that reality is nuanced, and the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose. There will always be new layers to explore, deeper emergent and reductive wonders to uncover. Honesty compels us to accept what science tells us about causality. With humility, we admit our experience of freedom might be bounded, and with awe, we cherish the subjective emergent freedom we do possess, the freedom to reflect, to choose in accordance with our nature, and to grow. In that spirit of reconciliation and reverence, the free will conundrum finds a resolution of sorts. We step forward as humble agents, determined yet free, writing our own chapter in the ever-unfolding story of the cosmos.